Have you been using your time of isolation to do more reading or to watch more television, maybe more Netflix? Whether it's a novel, a movie, a play, if you haven't read it or seen it before, what keeps you engaged is not knowing what's going to happen next. There's a sense of anticipation, of inquiry, of wonder. Now, the author of the book or the script, the director, the actors in the play or movie know the plot and where it's going because the story has already been written. But the audience is in the dark, waiting for the next event to happen, for the next decision to be made, for the next action to be taken. In a sense, it is that way with our stories too, isn't it? We know what has already transpired, but we don't know what's coming next. While we are actors in our own personal drama, we really don't know what's on the next page. Just look at how we were all, every one of us, caught off guard when the coronavirus pandemic hit. No one of us could have predicted its coming and its profound effects upon our lives and our world. The same might be said for the church. Those of us who have lived for decades within the church could never have imagined the profound effects of the clergy abuse scandal, the disappearance of the army of religious women who were the backbone of ministry for centuries, the alienation of young people from the church. Estimates are that an average of 6.5 young people leave the Catholic Church for every one that joins. And 50% of young people who were raised Catholic are no longer Catholic today. Who could have imagined? And finally, there is our country, with its intense political polarization, its growing economic disparity, and its deepening racial chasm. Now, while this may surprise us and make us painfully aware that we are not sure what is happening, and even less sure, or even if we can control what is happening, there is one major difference from the stories we have read or watch on the stage or TV and our stories. The difference is we know the ending of our story. In the end, we are all to live happily ever after with the Lord. Does that sound naive? Isn't that, in fact, what we are hoping for? Well, let's see if that's even possible, and what better time to reflect upon where we are going and how we might get there than now as we are beginning this season of Lent. The readings for this first Sunday of Lent set the goal before us right from the start. Our first reading from the book of Genesis describes the covenant that God makes not only with Noah and his descendants, but with the whole of creation. The vast, terrorizing flood which Noah and his family experienced was a return to the primordial chaos out of which the world had been created in the first place. God's covenant promises God's control over the primordial chaos. From that chaos, 8 were saved: Noah, Mrs. Noah, their 3 sons, and their 3 daughter-in-laws. 8 altogether. That's why traditional baptismal fonts, including the beautiful marble font in our church, are always octagonal in shape. The 8 sides represent the 8 people saved in the ark. But as the author of the first letter of Peter makes clear in our second reading today, these 8 prefigure all those who will be saved through the waters of baptism of those fonts, the waters of baptism. And we know that primordial chaos is not just about meteorological conditions at the time of Noah, but about the chaos that can occur in any of our lives at any time. When that chaos happens, God's promise is that we will not be alone. God, who shackled the forces of nature both at creation and at the flood, will be with us through our storms. Baptism recapitulates the flood and rainbow. And as Noah emerged and his family emerged from the ark into a new world, so we emerge from the waters of baptism as a new creation. This is the matrix by which we are called to understand not only today's readings, but our Lenten journey. But if we object and say, we're not preparing for baptism like the candidates of the rite of Christian initiation for adult process, we should recall the words of Martin Luther, who said, baptism only takes a few minutes to do, but a lifetime to finish. And this brings us to our gospel story with Mark's constant sense of urgency. No sooner has Jesus been baptized by John than the Spirit drives him into the desert where he encounters Satan. There's none of the dialogue and specific temptations in this account like we find in the stories that Matthew and Luke give us. Jesus just stands between Satan and the wild beasts and the angels who minister to him. And then he goes forth to proclaim the coming of God's kingdom. Mark doesn't say how the temptation of Jesus ends, just as Mark does not say how the Easter story ends. Why? Because they don't end. The story of the temptation and the story of the resurrection become our stories. Through baptism, the life of Jesus becomes our life. So the question is always the same. During Lent, where are we to go? What are we to do? As I explained on Ash Wednesday, our parish team has chosen to emphasize the positive dimension of this season. Instead of even thinking, as we usually do during Lent, of what we can give up in a year when all of us have given up so much already due to the pandemic, we hope to find new ways, new perspectives, and new pathways to open us to the Spirit. Hopefully, this will point us in a new direction that can bring us through Lent into Easter joy. The liturgical commentator, Father Richard Fragamini, puts it this way. For too long, we have thought that Lent is a time for us to sacrifice our wants and desires and to give up things in order to devote ourselves to God. The readings for today and for all the Sundays of Lent show us that, in a sense, the opposite is true. This is not a time for us to deny ourselves something, but a time for us to receive. We are not the ones to accomplish great things for God. Rather, it is God who acts. It is God who makes the sacrifice. It is God who accomplishes things for us. The readings for this Sunday provide us with a kind of synopsis of the entire Lenten season. They acknowledge that we are living in the midst of conflict. They sketch God as initiating a relationship with us even in the midst of conflict. They end with a proclamation of the good news of salvation. This Lent, perhaps we are being called to celebrate this holy season as we have never celebrated it before, to set aside our impulse to establish goals, to draw up action plans, to decide on agendas, and instead to focus on what we're going to do for God, but instead, perhaps this Lent, maybe for the first time in our lives, we are being called to let God be God for us and to live these 40 days with peace, with hope, with trust, and with joy.